For over 6 decades in music, Paul McCartney has witnessed the rise and fall of countless rock bands. But behind the friendly public smile, this legend maintains a personal blacklist of names he absolutely could not tolerate. From those who shamelessly copied the Beatles to groups that shocked the world with chaos, hedonism, and womanizing, and even a band that dared to publicly steal the Beatles' legacy for profit, all earned his contempt. So, which bands did Paul McCartney despise watch until the end, as the final band on this list reveals the tense hidden rivalries the music industry always tries to conceal? 1. The Rolling Stones. The debauched who only knew women. For half a century, fans believed the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were merely friendly rivals, often shaking hands for the cameras. But behind the smiles, Paul McCartney never truly considered the Stones an equal. While the Beatles dedicated their lives to perfecting melodies, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards made music amidst the stench of alcohol, drugs, and the cackling of women. McCartney once claimed, when the Beatles recorded, they argued about chord structure. When the Stones recorded, they argued about which girl slept with whom. Paul knew this and despised it. His contempt stemmed not only from their music, but from the lifestyle the Stones championed: partying, bragging, and treating women as props. While the Beatles maintained a polished image, the Stones turned themselves into icons of pure lust. Mick Jagger boasted of his conquests, Keith Richards appeared high in the press, and their shows resembled ecstatic rites more than concerts. But that wasn't the end of it. In 1968, the Rolling Stones released their Satanic Majesty's Request, a psychedelic album. Paul discovered it bore an uncanny resemblance to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. According to his team, McCartney was so furious, he threw the album copy to the floor and yelled, "A bunch of filthy copycats." His hatred was enduring. In a 2021 interview, McCartney couldn't contain himself, nearly causing a media uproar. "The Stones are just a blues cover band." Mick Jagger immediately retaliated on stage. The Beatles only had 4 people and a drummer. He was explicitly referring to Ringo Starr, often considered the Beatles' weak link. Jagger often used Ringo's name to needle the whole band. In a 1975 interview, when asked if the Stones would ever collaborate with the Beatles, Mick laughed and said, "Only if Ringo learns to keep time." This is why when John Lennon suggested producing a record for the Stones in 1969, McCartney was genuinely enraged. He threw the tape onto the table and demanded, "Why waste time on those hedonists?" Meetings between the two camps were always tense. Although Paul occasionally offered superficial compliments, his tone always carried an undercurrent of contempt. And perhaps that's precisely why the Beatles-Stones feud never truly ended. If the Rolling Stones earned Paul McCartney's disdain for their debauchery and sloppy music, the next band angered him in a different way. They dared to steal the Beatles' very soul for profit. 2. Oasis. The thieves who exploited the Beatles' legacy for tickets. Paul McCartney encountered countless imitators in his legendary career, but none provoked such anger and utter contempt as Oasis. In the 1990s, as Britpop swept the UK, brothers Noel and Liam Gallagher emerged as arrogant, loud figures who openly crowned themselves the descendants of the Beatles. Beyond the music, they copied McCartney's gestures, walk, hairstyle, and even his signature smirk. In photo shoots, Oasis deliberately recreated famous Beatles pictures, from the Abbey Road crossing scene to the group's tilted studio pose. To the public, this was homage, but to Paul McCartney, it was an insult. Noel Gallagher once told NME, "If it wasn't for the Beatles, there'd be no Oasis." While seemingly complimentary, McCartney saw it as cheap PR. He knew better than anyone. In show business, no one genuinely admires you if they can fully exploit your name. Initially, Paul maintained a polite front. Oasis is a band with good energy. I like their spirit. But behind the scenes, he was reportedly grinding his teeth over their stolen tracks. A close friend recalled, Paul laughed, but not in a happy way. He said, "Do they think copying chord progressions is creativity?" The deepest source of McCartney's rage wasn't Oasis's music, but the Gallagher brothers' attitude of self-appointed heirs. They didn't just admire the Beatles, they acted as if they were inheriting the throne. Noel brazenly declared to the press, "We are the modern-day Lennon and McCartney." This statement was a direct slap in Paul's face. He had spent his youth writing history-changing songs with John, and now a rash Britpop band arrogantly claimed to be the legitimate successor. He was so furious he once reportedly ripped the band's interview out of a paper within seconds. The insult didn't stop there. Liam Gallagher once mocked Paul on stage, mimicking his voice during Hey Jude, then yelling into the mic, "Thanks, Paul McCartney, for clearing the path for us. Now get out of the way, old man." Paul never forgot that moment. At an industry party in London in 1997, when Oasis walked in, he quietly left the table, avoiding any encounter. In his eyes, Oasis was the soulless copy of a dream they never understood. And to Paul McCartney, there was no greater offense than someone invoking an idol's name to profit from the legacy he built with his sweat and heart. When Oasis earned Paul McCartney's contempt for their arrogance and pretense, the next band made him truly shudder. This is no longer a story of failed successors, but a raw rebellion where music became a weapon, and the name of Paul, Britain's greatest living legend, was publicly ridiculed. 3. The Sex Pistols. Using the Beatles as a target practice and the public brawl. If there was one genre Paul McCartney truly despised, it was punk rock, the loud, raw music that disregarded every rule he had established. At the epicenter of this chaotic storm was the Sex Pistols, four unruly, drug-addled lads ready to tear down the monument created by the previous generation. In 1976, when the Sex Pistols emerged with jarring guitars and challenging lyrics, McCartney started to feel eye strain. "Their music is an assault on the ears," McCartney reportedly fumed. "It's a dreadful headache to listen to." However, his true fury was not the music, but the public scorn from Johnny Rotten, the Sex Pistols' cheeky frontman. Rotten constantly made shocking media statements, outright calling McCartney a zombie and a washed-up dinosaur. This disrespect wasn't limited to words. According to drummer Denny Sywell, the Sex Pistols even used Beatles posters for target practice in their rehearsal space. Paul's young face was riddled with holes from plastic pellets. Paul tried to laugh it off, but that night he threw out all the remaining Beatles posters in the studio, Denny recalled. "I'd never seen him that angry." Ironically, after the Sex Pistols broke up in 1978, Rotten publicly slammed the very band that made him famous. He called them a media joke and a manipulated band, blaming the manager, proving that the chaos and contempt were not just aimed at McCartney, but were the rotten core of the Sex Pistols themselves. The generational clash reached its peak in early 1977 when Paul McCartney's Wings and the Sex Pistols were coincidentally recording at AIR Studios, London. The narrow studio hallway was thick with cigarette smoke, cheap alcohol, and stale air. McCartney stepped out of Studio 2 holding a teacup, looking composed and elegant, the perfect image of a British legend. At the other end of the hall, Sid Vicious leaned against the wall, his leather jacket stained with beer, eyes bloodshot, chewing on a half-smoked cigarette. When the two men faced each other, the atmosphere went silent. Paul, with a gentleman's instinct, forced a smile and offered